Being average kids, we snuck behind our parents' back and went exploring anyway. It is still so vivid in my mind. So many spring and summer evenings we would meet up in front of my friend Jenny's house because her house backed right up to the woods, and a group of about 5 or 6 of us would sneak back there. About 100 yards into the woods was a little stream that we could walk on the banks of as a guided path through the forest. We never really made it all that far before at least one of us, and secretly all of us, got a bit nervous and wanted to turn back. A bit of backstory as to why the parents told us to stay out of the woods. There was an old ranch built on a large clearing back there that was owned by an old miser. He had been known to tote a shotgun around and was more than willing to open fire as a warning shot to scare the shit out of some kids that happened to stumble onto his land. The old man's name was Jeffrey, which always struck me as funny. It seemed like such a kid's name for such a daunting figure. Anyway, our parents didn't want us encountering this man by chance, and it wasn't only for fear that he may aim a warning shot a bit too low and take off one of our heads. Years before my family had moved into the neighborhood, there was a boy named Willie that had gone missing. He was missing for nearly 6 weeks, when one night, a group of boys coming outside for a late night round of kick the can found him. He was lying in the center of a cul-de-sac, right on top of the manhole cover on his back, with his arms folded across his chest. Dead. The cause of death was never determined, and no one knew for a fact where he had been for those 6 weeks. A great many of the parents had begun openly accusing Jeffrey, which drove him into a life of seclusion. He was rarely seen outside of his ranch. The rumor of his involvement stuck with him through the years, with every new generation of kids and parents that moved into the neighborhood. Despite the parents' best efforts to keep this hidden, every kid knew about it. It was the stuff of legend, just like I assume every neighborhood has. We would try to make it as far back into the woods as possible in hopes of maybe finding that ranch, none of us knowing what we would do if we actually found it. One day, my best friend Billy and I just decided to go for it. We told the rest of our little gang, and of course, they were all in. I remember meeting in front of Jenny's house as usual. There were 6 of us total, and I think I stood in front of the other 5, trying to sound as tough as a 12-year-old can. Listen, we ain't a bunch of little pussies. We're gonna find that damn ranch tonight, and then we're going to ding-dong ditch that son of a bitch. My rousing speech got a resounding response of hell yes from the rest of the crew. We all made our way through Jenny's backyard, jumped the fence, and made it to the edge of the woods. I looked at everyone assembled there, and I knew we were finally going to do it and go down in kid infamy. I also noticed that we all already looked scared shitless. The sun just began to set as we took our first steps into the woods that day. Once we made it to the stream, we did as we usually did, turned right, which I'm pretty sure had us heading west. The other way would have just spat us into another neighborhood. We went for what seemed at least a mile, much further than any of us had ventured before. Then I heard Billy say, "What the fuck is that?" He didn't scream it, but I could hear a great deal of fear in his voice. I looked back at him, and the look on his face more than doubled the fear in his voice. I started to look in the direction he was facing. I could barely see it from where we were. The sun was almost hidden, and there was a bluish shadow over everything. The only thing that I could definitely see, in silhouette, was a small shack. We started to walk toward it. As we got closer, I could tell that the shack was actually an outhouse. I could also tell that what had scared Billy was actually, oddly enough, an old school bus. The yellow was practically faded to white. The pivoting stop sign was laid out on the ground. It was crashed into a tree. When we got closer, it became clear that whenever this crashed here, it had apparently caught fire. The interior, as well as the entire passenger side of the bus, was burnt to a crisp. We were circling the bus for a while when I noticed our youngest friend, Jake, staring off into the distance. The distance being a clearing the size of a large field. Jeffrey's ranch stood on the far end of the clearing. A few of its windows filled with a dim, almost brown-yellow glow of light. The whole group joined Jake at the mouth of the woods, and without speaking, we started walking toward the ominous-looking ranch. I wasn't about to admit it, but I was scared out of my wits. Despite that, Billy and me took the lead, walking ahead of the other three. I heard them whispering behind us. Finally, little Jake spoke up, causing both Billy and I nearly to jump out of our skin. "Hey guys, I think we should turn back." Calming down, I turned back to him and said, "Fuck that, man. We're already closer than any kid has been to the ranch. We can't turn back now." Jake answered, "I know, but this just seems like a bad idea." "I agree with Jake," Jenny claimed. "We should turn back." "Well, I'm going up there. You guys can leave if you want. Bunch of wimps," Billy yelled, cutting sharply through the thick silence. "Whatever. I'm out," Jake said and turned back towards the woods with Jenny and Jenny's little brother quickly behind. Billy turned to me and said, "You still in?" All I could muster through the thick fear in my throat was, "If you are, let's go." The two of us carried onward toward the ranch. We didn't talk as we made our way toward it. The sun was completely set at this time, and a half moon shrouded by gray clouds was peeking over the edge of the tree line. There were lightning bugs all over the place. If I had not been so focused and terrified over the prospect of reaching the ranch, it would have been a truthfully joyful scene. It seemed like it took us forever, but we reached the corner of the actually house on the ranch. It was about 50 yards long. At the halfway point of the front of the ranch was a small wooden staircase that led up to the front door. A gravel road led up to the staircase that trailed off into the open field, and I assumed to a path through the woods. Between Billy and I and the front door of the home was a lit window, shaded by a curtain. There was a bright slice of light peeking through where the curtain split. I took the first step, sliding along the length of the house with Billy close behind. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the window. I was too scared to look. I was expecting to see some crazy old man dancing around with a corpse or laying a bathtub of children's blood. "Look inside," Billy whispered. "I don't think I can. I'm too scared," I said, feeling quite ashamed. "Okay, I will." He pushed me aside and stuck his face in the window, interrupting the yellow sliver of light that spilt from the slightly open curtain. He looked back at me, and his face looked terrified. Oh my God. I was afraid to ask, but did anyway. "What is it?" It's absolutely nothing, you pussy." He started laughing at me, so I looked into the window. Like he said, there was nothing. Just 4 white walls and a wooden door. It was completely empty, save for an old leather armchair in one corner opposite of the door, and a wooden table in the middle. It struck me as odd, but not enough to make me any more scared, so I just started laughing right along with Billy. After a minute or so, Billy said, "Alright, only one more thing to do and we will be the coolest kids in the neighborhood. We gotta ring the doorbell." Laughing over the nearly empty room had settled my nerves a bit, so I agreed. We began to creep toward the front door, and once we climbed the wooden staircase, and we were standing in front of it, Billy said, "Go ahead, man. Push it." Without hesitating, I reached up and pushed the button. I was expecting the typical ding-dong of any run-of-the-mill doorbell. Looking back on it now, for some reason, I seriously doubt it made that sound. It seems too bright and warming of a sound. Whatever ring came from the pushing of that button, I never heard it. It was drowned out instead by the most gut-wrenching scream that I have ever heard to this day. Strangely, it didn't come from the house, but more frighteningly, from the direction we had come from in the woods. Both of our natural reactions was to yank the door open and go inside. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. We frantically ran through the house, which I noticed, compared to the one room we saw through the window, was well furnished, like any other house you've seen. Somehow we ended up pushing through a door and standing in an empty room. From the inside, it had a much more sinister tone. For some reason, Billy flipped the light switch off as I walked toward the window in an attempt to see who or what made that scream. By then, the moon was almost completely covered by clouds, so I could see no definite shapes, person or otherwise. Instead, all I could see was what appeared to be a lantern swaying back and forth. The light began to grow and grow as it approached the house, and I became more and more unsettled. "I think we need to get the hell out of this room," I said to Billy, who was also watching the light as it approached. More so than ever, the lack of furniture in the room gave me a horrible, uneasy feeling. We ran for the door to the room, opened it, and walked back into the foyer of the house. We started toward the front door, but right before Billy went to grab it, it began to shift from someone trying to open it on the other side. We both ran into what seemed to be the living room of Jeffrey's home. I dove behind a couch and Billy slid between the wall and a bookcase. From behind the couch, I heard a key slip into the lock, followed by the door opening. The door slammed, and it was followed by the sound of something slumping to the floor. "You break into my house, you little bitch!" It was the smoky, scratchy voice of an old man. I looked over the bookcase that Billy was hiding behind. He was peeking from behind it toward me. I saw him point toward me, so I glanced over my shoulder to see the back door of the house. I was too scared to move, frozen by fear. After a moment, Jeffrey made a huge grunt, and I heard another door open and close. He had gone into the unfurnished room where we had seen him approach from. After the door was shut to the room, I immediately got up and walked to the back door with Billy following. As quietly as possible, I opened the door, let Billy out, and I shut it without a sound. We set off at a dead sprint back toward where we had entered the clearing of the ranch. We got about halfway to the woods before we heard yet another scream. This time, coming from the house. We both stopped dead in our tracks and turned back toward the house. I knew without Billy saying, "That's Jenny. We need to go back." Despite being more scared than I had ever been in my life, we started back. The light to the empty room had been turned back on by the time we reached the same corner of the ranch we had come to before. Billy started walking along the length of the house as we had before until we reached the window. I looked first, and what I saw horrified me. There was an old man sitting in the chair that was positioned in the corner of the room. Before him, on the wooden table, was Jenny, all of her limbs tied to each leg of the table, and at this point, a rag had been tied around her mouth. "We need to leave, now," I whispered frantically as I looked back toward Billy. He was staring away from the house with his mouth gaping wide. I looked in the direction he was facing, toward the gravel road that leads up to the ranch. Much like we had seen before, there were lantern-like lights swaying back and forth, multiple lights. I began running back to the corner of the house, dragging Billy by the arm behind me. We reached the corner of the house and crouched down. Once the lights reached the front door, we could see that they were being carried by cloaked figures. All that was revealed of the figures, from beneath their cloaks, were hands. The front door of the ranch opened and each figure made their way in. The door shut, and we both could hear a great deal of conversation going down inside the house. Against my better judgment, I made my way back to the lit window and peeked in. All of the cloaked figures were now gathered in a circle around the tied-down Jenny. I caught a few glimpses of her terrified face as she struggled in vain to free herself from the ropes tying her down. The old man stood up from his spot in the corner and opened a trap door in the floor that I had not noticed until he opened it. He walked down the stairs that led into the hole. A few minutes passed, and he re-emerged wearing an identical black cloak. He also carried a couple items with him as well, though at the moment, I couldn't tell what they were. He set one of the items down in the chair he had been sitting on. He took the other item and crouched down on one end of the room. It was a piece of charcoal and started to draw a design on the floor of the room. And at the time, I was too young to realize what it was when he was done. But if I had been a few years older, I would have realized it was a pentagram, leaving poor Jenny in its dead center. While he did the drawing, it was disturbing to see how nonchalant the other cloaked figures seemed to be. They continued conversing amongst themselves without even taking notice of Jenny. They even seemed jovial. After the old man had finished his drawing of the symbol on the floor, they all spread as far around the room as possible. 2 people stood before the window, and I could still hear everyone talking, though I couldn't understand any words they were saying. The mumbles of the 2 people before the window seemed oddly familiar, but I had no time to linger on the thought. Suddenly, the clouds covering the moon, which at this point was standing high in the sky, cleared away, and the whole opening, which far more expansive than I had first thought, was bathed in a silver light. The people inside the house began cheering, and as I looked back through the window, what I saw, I still can't, to this day, scrub from my memory. The old man had taken the second item he had brought from the trapdoor, a large silver knife, and made his way toward the table. He slit both of Jenny's wrists, and there had been 2 chalices placed on each side of the table into which Jenny's blood dripped. I turned around and ran without another thought. Billy had already begun running before me and was much closer to the tree line. I saw him dive into the forest a full minute before I reached it. Eventually, I crashed into the woods and past the broken down old bus and outhouse. After I passed those, I tripped, and before I could tell what was going on, I was submerged in the stream. I stood up and saw Billy only a few feet away. "Jesus Christ, man, let's go!" He yelled, and I started running toward him, but then I tripped over something. I could tell it wasn't a tree branch or a big rock. It was something soft. As I stood, I quickly realized it was a leg. There was Jake and Jenny's little brother, face down in the stream. They had both clearly been drowned to death. I pulled both of them up to the bank of the stream and continued running. It seemed like hours, but finally Billy and I emerged from the woods, and without a word, we split paths, each of us going to our homes. I ran through the back door of my home with impeccable timing. I saw through one of the front-facing windows of our house my parents pulling up the driveway. They both got out of the van, and I could hear the mumbles of their conversation going on outside. It sounded familiar, like mumbling I had heard only an hour earlier. I hesitated to walk outside, but nonetheless, I opened the door and walked out toward my parents. They must not have noticed me, because they continued talking about how the evening was a total success outside of those other damn kids. My dad opened the trunk. As I was about to call out to them, what I saw stopped me short. The hood of the black cloak slumped out onto the ground. "Son?" my mom said, startled. "What are you doing up this late?" I started to back away from them as I noticed the black train of a cloak hanging out from beneath the floral pattern of my mom's dress. As I made it back to the door of the house without a word, I looked down our little suburban street and noticed that many of the driveways had vehicles pulling into them. The occupants of the cars were all wearing black cloaks, or pulling them from inside of their cars. I ran up to my room and locked the door. Billy and I never spoke of that night with each other, ever. We never saw our three friends again. When I was 9 years old, my family moved from Florida to Kentucky. We moved in the middle of January, making the 1,000-mile drive over the course of 2 days. The transition as the heat and sun of Florida gave way to the cold, gray-brown gloom of the Kentucky hills was a jarring one. The winter clothes we'd bought in Florida proved to be inadequate for the bitter cold weather of our new home state. And so we had to stop at some 24-hour supercenter in the middle of the night to purchase coats and gloves. The house my parents had bought wasn't much to look at. It had been built in the early 50s out of pale yellow brick, a single story perched atop a drafty, unfinished basement. It sat square in the middle of a valley on 3 acres of wooded land, and the knobs loomed off in the distance, their rounded tops covered in trees. In Florida, everything had been within walking distance. Here, nothing was. We couldn't even get a pizza delivered, as we discovered that first night in the new house. The man who built the house used to own all the land in the valley, we learned. It had been passed down from his father, who had in turn inherited it from his father, and so on and so forth. He had sold off parcels of land bit by bit over the years until the only piece left was the one we now owned. Our house was the only one he had built out of the few houses in the valley. The original house had burned down, and he didn't want to pay someone to build the new one. He didn't have much talent for building, really. Nothing in the house was square. The basement leaked every time it rained, and come the turning of the season, we discovered exactly how much it rained in Kentucky in the spring. For some reason, the woods behind the house always spooked me. I'd explored them briefly when we first moved in, but I hadn't stuck around for long. Something about their silence was unnerving, like they were waiting for something. Besides that, I always had this weird feeling that I was decidedly unwelcome. The first few years were rough. We had to adjust to rural living, to everything being at least a 30-minute drive away, to the changing seasons, to so much snow that the electricity went out for days, to so much rain that mud and rocks slid down off the hillsides and blocked the roads. We adjusted though. We got used to the snow and the mud. We got used to the distance and to the way the land went from brown to green and back again. The thing is, no matter how comfortable I became in our new home, I still felt unwelcomed in the woods. They were too alien to me, or perhaps I was too alien to them. I think I was 11 when the nightmares started. Every night when I'd fall asleep, I'd have this dream that there was a storm threatening overhead, and that I was in the field that lay in between the house and the woods. I was digging in the dirt with my bare hands, and I was frantic, panicking, clawing away the heavy clay soil until my nails were broken and bleeding. Beneath my fingers, I would suddenly feel a sudden smoothness, and then I'd pull an object from the ground. A skull no bigger than a baby's, the eye sockets full of red sticky earth. Symbols were carved deep into the forehead, and the red dirt had stained them the color of old bone. One by one, I'd dig more skulls out, knowing I had to uncover them all before the storm hit. Because there was something in the woods, something terrible, and it hated me. It was old as time, and it had been in the valley since the valley had existed, and all it wanted was to break loose from the trees so it could get me. In my dream, I never saw the creature, but I knew somehow that it was something that looked like a cross between a dog and a boar, with tusks and a slavering mouth full of sharp teeth. It was gray and brown and had a bad and rigid back and massive paws, and it paced back and forth just beyond the tree line. I could hear it howling and snarling, and I could feel how badly it wanted to break free, to run through the woods until it burst loose from the trees, but it couldn't. Something about those skulls kept it back there, kept it away, but their power was waning. If I didn't dig them all up before the first lightning strike, the creature would be loose. The dream always ended the same way, with me desperately trying to wrench the last skull out of the earth as the lightning struck. The electric jolt it sent through the ground beneath me always made me snap awake, heart pounding, grateful to find it was just a dream. It was a persistent dream. I had it at least twice a week, every week, for the entirety of my life there. Even as I got old enough to stop believing in monsters, the woods still made me uneasy. I guess having so many nightmares about the woods tainted them for me, instilled a permanent aversion to them. When I was a kid, I'd even gone digging once, in the same spot I dug the skulls from the dirt in my dreams. Nothing had come from it, and I got into huge trouble for digging deep holes I dug all over the yard. The older I got, the more ridiculous I felt for still being scared of the woods, and for the persistent dreams. I sought out a local school of metaphysics that offered dream interpretation. When I told the interpreter about it, he just shook his head. I don't know. Honestly, all I can think is that you're carrying some burden from a past life. I left, feeling frustrated and silly for having even gone down that path. I decided I'd just push the fear to the back of my mind and ignore it. It's just a stupid dream, I told myself. Nothing was in the woods. There were no skulls buried in the yard, and there was no creature waiting to get me. Eventually, I did what all people do and moved out of my parents' house, or my mom's house, I suppose I should call it. My parents had divorced by then, and my dad moved into an apartment with his much younger girlfriend. Mom got the house in the divorce, and she was adamant about staying in it. I'm not moving again, she told me. I'll stay in this house until the day I die. And she was right. Almost. She stayed in the house up until the day before she died. 7 years ago, she developed a heart and lung disease for which there is no cure. Only a delay in the inevitable. Her ability to care for the house became less, and my husband and I had to step in and help her with a lot of things. He took over mowing the yard and general household repairs, and I took over housework and grocery shopping for her. We even put off having kids so we could focus on caring for her. She was determined to stay in the house, stubborn to a fault, even though she couldn't manage on her own, and taking care of her house and our own was exhausting. The more time I spent at the house, the more nightmares returned. After I moved out, they had dwindled, maybe coming once every few months or so, like a visit from an unwelcomed relative. Now that I was back in the house, they returned in full force. I told myself it was stress. Stress from having to care for my mom. Stress over seeing her get increasingly frail. It was like the house deteriorated right along with her, and we had to go over there constantly. The pipes kept bursting in winter, even when they were insulated, and my husband had replaced every single one of them. The floor in the bathroom started to rot, and the toilet tilted at a weird angle. Mice and wasps invaded the attic. Mold sprouted in the basement, and the cracks in the basement wall widened and let even more water in. The yard that my mom always kept so neatly tended became wild. Trees sprouting up all over the yard and weeds pushing their way up through every crack in the driveway and walkway. There was never enough time or money to stay on top of it all. Her medical bills piled up and up and up. Still, she refused to leave the house. She became reclusive, only letting us take her out when it was time for yet another doctor's appointment. Sometimes, she didn't even want to see me or my husband. Last December, her doctor gave her a timeline. Her illness had become terminal. She had less than a year. He was hopeful that she might make it 6 more months, but he couldn't promise anything. In reality, she faded much faster than that. She had in-home hospice care, which relieved some of the burden on me and my husband. It allowed me to spend some time with her just to talk, rather than having to feed her or help her bathe. Then one day, she was having trouble keeping food down. They wanted to take her to the hospice wing of the hospital to see what the problem was. They loaded her up in the ambulance and took her away, and the next day, she died in her sleep. I was numb. I had no other family here, and we had to clean out the house. She had 2 elderly dogs, and we took them in, not wanting to just pawn them off on someone, or worse, put them in a shelter. It brought me comfort to have something still to take care of, something that depended on me. Having to box up all of her worldly possessions was painful and exhausting. We started sorting through everything not long after she died. The people from hospice came and collected the oxygen tanks and the wheelchair and the hospital bed. I gathered up all of her pills and took them to the police station to dispose of them. All of her debt meant the house would have to be sold. So we spent weeks boxing up everything and sorting through stacks of mail, trying to find out what still needed to be paid and what needed to stop being paid. The house fell apart even more as we worked, as though my mother had been the last thing holding it together. The last thing keeping the wilderness at bay. With her gone, it all went completely to hell in a remarkably short amount of time. We've almost finished clearing it out, just a few things are left. But it's been so hard to get out to her house lately. The weather has been bad here lately, unusually so. There have been record rainfalls accompanied by violent thunderstorms. The main road that I always took to get to her house crosses over a creek, and the last round of rain caused flash flooding that washed the bridge away. What had been a 10-minute drive has become a 30-minute drive. Because to get to her house now, I have to go all the way around the valley instead of being able to cut straight through like I used to. They cut the power to her house a couple of weeks ago. We couldn't keep paying the electric bill. She didn't have life insurance, and what little money she had left in her bank account we used to pay for her cremation. I got a letter a few weeks ago from the county clerk. Mom apparently hadn't paid her property taxes in a while, and they're going to auction off the house sooner or later. I need to get the rest of her things out of there. None of it is valuable, really, but all of it has some sentimental value. All of this brings me to today. I had to go to her house today. The oldest dog died. My husband found him curled up in his bed, like he was still sleeping. I decided that I'd bury the dog in the backyard at my mom's house. It'd be nice, you know. Mom loved the shitty old heap of a house, and she loved her dogs, and it made her happy to see them running around in the yard. I wanted to be by myself, so I told my husband to stay behind. He tries to be strong and support me, but he's sad too, and I couldn't bear for both of us to be in the middle of all that sadness. I got to her house about an hour ago. I took a shovel from her garage and started digging in the backyard. Like everything here though, the shovel is old and the handle snapped when I was digging. All the rain has made the soil heavy, you see. That thick red Kentucky clay sucks up the water, and every shovelful felt like it weighed 20 pounds. No wonder the damned thing broke. It's okay though. I can use my hands for the rest. It's threatening to storm again. It stormed all weekend, and it stormed yesterday. In the distance, there's a rumble of thunder. Better finish burying the dog before it starts raining again. The earth is sticky on my hands, clinging to everything. Beneath my fingers, there's suddenly a smoothness, a roundness in the earth. A howl comes from the woods behind me, raising goosebumps on my arms, and all the fear of those nightmares hits me. Except this time, it's real. I'm awake and all I can hear is something prowling through those woods. Slowly, so slowly, each heavy step, deliberate. The rain is starting to patter down again. A drop here, a drop there. The lightning will strike any minute now. I knew it would be a skull as soon as I felt the smoothness in the earth under my fingers. The rain was picking up steadily, and the ground was already so saturated that the hole was filling with water even as I dug. The thunder was rumbling, but no lightning. Not yet. It was only a matter of time though, and time was no longer something I had enough of to spare. The ground didn't want to give up, but I pulled free, my fingers numb from digging. A child-sized skull with carvings across the forehead stained by the red dirt. I have no idea how old it is, how long it has been there, or who had put it there originally. From my dreams, I knew where the next ones would be. There were always 5 skulls total, spaced exactly 12 inches apart. The one I had pulled from the dirt was the second to last. The rain was falling harder and the thing in the woods was pacing back and forth. I could hear its footfalls over the pounding of the rain. Could hear it panting and snarling. I felt overwhelming hatred coming from it, rolling from the woods in waves. I wanted more than anything just to run. But my mom's backyard is riddled with ditches and holes and tree rots, and I knew that if I ran, I would never make it. Not if it got free. I also felt as though I needed to see it through until the end, whatever the end was. 20 years of dreaming of that moment was something I couldn't shrug off, couldn't just run from. I'd had the dreams for a reason. The handle of the shovel may have been broken, but I still had the blade. I couldn't dig very fast with it, but at least it was better than just using my hands. The second skull was easy to find. I knew what I was looking for after all. A lifetime of dreaming of this exact moment had prepared me for it. Like the first, it was child-sized and heavily carved. It seemed older than the other one somehow. It was more stained and looked far more fragile. The third one I dug out was even older still, cracked and crazed with tiny lines. I was sure it would fall apart in my hands, but somehow it held together. One by one I dug them from the earth. I was soaked by that point. And just like in my dreams, my fingers were bloody. I hacked at the ground with the shovel blade, splinters from the broken handle lodging in my palms. The thing in the woods was becoming more frantic, and now I could see it just beyond the tree line, a massive shadow that stalked back and forth, coming closer and closer to the edge of the woods. Any minute now, any minute, the lightning would strike. 2 skulls left to go. They weren't buried very far down. I don't know how I'd never found them before, how I hadn't uncovered them that time I'd gone looking for them. I was crying as I dug, and my hair was plastered to my neck and face from the heat and the rain. All the grief I was feeling over the death of my mom, the death of her dog, the fact that she'd never known her grandchildren when we had them was all overwhelming. Tears and snot were running down my face, and the mud was everywhere. I slammed the shovel blade down again and again, ripping out chunks of grass and dirt and rocks. Once I got close to where I thought the skull should be, I switched to using my hands, not wanting to risk breaking it with the shovel. Blood mingled from the water in the hole, and the goddamned nightmare was howling. Always howling. Desperate to get me? Why now? Why had it never shown itself before this? All those years we lived there, all those years, and no one ever knew anything about it. It was only ever in my dreams before, but now it was here. Real and hungry. So hungry. It had been starving for 100 years at least, for as long as the valley had been occupied. It had been in those woods, waiting for someone to forget how to keep it locked away. I pulled the skull loose and set it on the grass. Chips of bones were embedded in the mud where it had rested. What would happen if the skulls broke? Would their power still hold? Or would the breaking create a hole for the nightmare to slip through? Who had put them there, and how exactly did they work? In my dreams, I always woke up when the lightning struck, before the last skull was freed. The storm and the skulls were connected in some way. They controlled it, or maybe it controlled them. The first lightning strike of a summer storm had some power over the nightmare thing, but I didn't know why. I still had one more to go. One last one. This was the part in the dream where I always failed. I dug as fast as I dared, frantic. I could smell the lightning coming. The air reeked of ozone and the copper and iron scent of my blood. I dropped the shovel blade and dug with my hands again, faster, until I felt it beneath my fingers. That smoothness, the roundness of a child's skull between the palms of my hands. I pulled it from the mud and collapsed next to the hole, clutching the skull to my chest. I heard the warning crack of thunder then, and knew what was coming. Lightning struck the ground in front of the woods, sizzling in the grass. The skulls lit up like jack-o'-lanterns, eye sockets burning in the rain-soaked dusk, sending sparks into the air. I flung the one that I was clutching away from my body. My shirt was scorched and my hands were burned with the same symbols that were carved into the skull. From the woods behind me, I heard a wailing howl. Then I heard something that struck me cold, an answering howl from somewhere else in the valley. Then another, and another. The nightmare in the woods behind my mom's house wasn't the only one. It makes sense now. In a weird way, I think it's all connected. My mom remarked once that her street had a lot of sickness in it. The men and women who lived there had an unusually high rate of cancer, of heart disease, and of strokes. They sickened and they died in their 50s and 60s, just like my mom had. Or they snapped and went crazy. One neighbor had killed another one a few years back over a land dispute. Another one shot himself in the basement of his family home. And yet another one was caught building pipe bombs in his shed. Their houses fell apart, burned to the ground, rotted. Tragedy upon tragedy, sickness and rot all along the street, all through the valley. I think the nightmares feed on the people. They want their valley back. The skulls may somehow keep them at bay, but it won't last. Not forever. One by one, the people in the valley are dying, and when they die, the land starts to reclaim their houses. The howling went on as I reburied the skulls. They're even more fragile now. So brittle, so close to breaking. The lightning must have charged them somehow. Or maybe what power they have keeps the lightning from breaking the barrier in the woods. I wish I knew more. I wish there was a way for me to find out. So many superstitions revolve around bones and blood and iron. I bled in the earth and on the skulls when I dug them out. Iron in the shovel blade. Bones in the earth. Maybe the combination made it work, and I was lucky. Or maybe it was nothing at all. I buried the dog when I was done. I might come back one last time and leave something on the grave. Maybe I'll carve the symbol burned into my hand on a stone and leave it behind, a marker, and maybe a warning. There's a house on a quiet country road in Bullitt County, Kentucky. It's built of pale yellow brick, and it sits atop a leaky basement. There are 5 freshly dug holes in the earth, and in those holes are 5 carved skulls so small they'd almost fit in the palm of your hand. The skulls are old, and like the house, they're crumbling. They'll break soon, and when they do, something will be freed. I don't know how many skulls there are around the valley. I don't even really know how they work, really, or who, or what is making me dream about them. I don't know how many nightmare things wait in the woods. I'm not waiting to find out. I'm gonna get away. Away from those knobs and valleys of Kentucky. Away from what might be coming. And the house will go up for auction, and I hope to God that no one buys it. If you ever start to dream about digging skulls from the red clay earth, leave. Get out while you still can. Before you sicken and die. Before you find yourself digging holes in the dirt, trying to beat the storm.